if you look at the chemical ingredients of life itself, you remember from biology class, we're mostly water. And good old water is H2O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. And if you could look at the sort of the element budget of life, hydrogen is number 1, as expressed in the water molecule. The number 2 in the human body is oxygen, turns out. Number 3 in the human body is carbon. 4 is nitrogen. 5, you find on all lists, is other. Okay, now if you go to the universe, that's the O on the periodic table. You didn't know that? That's not for oxygen, it's for other. So you go into the universe, number 1 ingredient in the universe is hydrogen. That was true in life. Number 2 ingredient in the universe is helium. We don't have that one.
It doesn't like anybody.
No, how come? Well, because helium is chemically inert. You can't do anything with it even if you wanted. Or you can inhale it, okay? And sound like Mickey Mouse, yes. Next in the universe is oxygen. Next, carbon. Next, other. Thank you, in the 3rd row there. So, actually that was the 2nd row. They must be related to the 2nd row here. We are 1-for-1 matchup with the most abundant ingredients in the universe. Of these, carbon is the most chemically fertile element in the entire periodic table. You can make more kinds of molecules with carbon than all other molecules combined. So, if you were going to experiment through the forces of nature with complex chemistry, and you had to pick an element to base it on, carbon is your man. Or your woman, however that goes. Okay, so what I'm saying is, given what carbon is capable of doing, perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised that there's life, because we are carbon-based life. We're just another one of the things carbon has rolled up its sleeve. Maybe life is inevitable, given the abundance of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen in the universe. Try to invert that view. Otherwise, you're left thinking, hey, we're special. You know I would give you right to say you're special? If life on Earth were made of an isotope of bismuth. That stuff is nowhere in the cosmos, and then we're made of it, we're special. Okay? But if we're the most common ingredients of the matter that we know and love, you don't have an argument.
Someone who bases everything on reason has faith in the reasoning process. What's wrong with saying that? Why can't you say, I have confidence in reason, I have faith in reason, I trust in the reasoning process? You won't say that because it will reveal that both our positions are faith positions. If you ask me why I believe in the Bible and I flip open the Bible and show you a verse, you say you're appealing to what you need to prove. If I ask you, why do you believe in reason, and give me a reason,
I'll tell you
then
what,
you open your book,
no,
you open the reason, and you give me a reason.
No, you're making a huge leap. I say that the Bible, like the Quran and like the Torah, is man-made, not God-made. It's a human-made literary accretion full of plagiarism, contradiction, fragmentation, and so on. It's like every other book ever written.
And I wrote,
there is nothing divine about it, and the appeal to it saying, I can trump anything you say because here's God's word on the page, is a contemptible way of arguing.
I wrote a logic textbook. Does that make logic man-made?
Logic is man-made, yes.
Yeah. So there's no reason to follow it then?
No.
If I reject Bible because it's man-made.
Logic is the attempt by humans to make sense. It isn't a divine endowment that we possess. Same with philosophy. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. We don't say it's the revelation by... You say what you have is revealed. Now, here's the way of clarifying the difference between us, somebody asked earlier. I don't claim to know more than I can. Everything I've said this evening, I've backed by assertions, evidence, argument. Douglas Wilson, who's just as modest and friendly and tender a chap as I am, says, yeah, but I have an advantage over Christopher, because I know what God wants, and I know what he says in his book. I have access to higher authority. Now, what I want you, I'll ask him, but I don't care. I've asked him before. You have to ask him. How does he know that? And by what right does he claim to know the mind of God? And if you were a serious spiritual person, wouldn't you think it was a bit much that someone said they could come before you and tell you what God wanted? As long as they don't call it modesty, I don't mind. As long as they don't call it humility, I don't mind. But I don't like being told that my arguments aren't as good as his because he has divine information that's withheld from me.
It's a beautiful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope of a distant galaxy, far, far away and long, long ago. And there's a whole galaxy, it's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And they're remarkable, and I keep having asides. Maybe I'll get to my point eventually. But this is something that I wrote a whole book about, and someone asked me yesterday why I wrote that book. Because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe. Richard wrote a great book called, what's it called? Our Ancestors? What's it called? Ancestor's Tale, yes. I wanted to make sure I got that right. And I wrote a book that was a different ancestor's tale. It was called Adam. But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution, weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
The one thing that I think is really dangerous in many religions is that it gives people a gold-plated excuse to stop thinking.
To stop thinking?
To stop thinking. To say, I don't have to think about that because my religion says this is right, this is wrong, it's as clear as that, it's black and white, I don't have to think about this anymore. It's just a matter of faith. And we honor that. We say, oh, it's a matter of faith. I think we have to stop honoring people for stopping thinking.
1,000 years ago, the intellectual center of the world was Baghdad. Baghdad. Europe was busy disemboweling heretics at the time. Baghdad was open to all thought at the time, between AD 800 and 1100, around there. If you look at the advances that unfolded in that period, in that location, it includes the invention of algebra. Algebra is an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. 2/3 of the stars in the night sky that have names have Arabic names. How does that happen? Where did the naming rights come from? It came from the fact that at that time, huge advances in the Middle East, in Baghdad in particular, was unfolded in engineering, mathematics, especially mathematics, astronomy, navigation, physiology. And you say, well, why is that so? If you look at what was going on, they were open to all lines of thought. Jews, Muslims, Christians. There were doubters back then. Today we would call them atheists. They would all come around a table and share ideas. If you have some philosophy that's got holes in it, someone's going to find it. And you're going to challenge you on those ideas. And what happens is the conversation ratchets up. You discard what doesn't work and you keep what does. And when you do that, you make discoveries, and you make discoveries rapidly. And at the time, that period drew to a close. If you read history books, they'll typically describe sort of the sacking of Baghdad. It was a bad time for the city. And they'd say, oh, it all came to an end. However, the Islamic culture rose at other times later. And in those other times, science and engineering discoveries were not a part of it. So he asked, why not? You got the cultural heritage, why doesn't it show up again? And then you got to dig a little deeper. from the sacking of Baghdad, and you find out there was a Muslim cleric, Al-Ghazali was his name, who was to Islam what St. Augustine was to Christianity. St. Augustine kind of laid out the rules for how to be a good Christian at the time. A lot of people were practicing it in their own way. He codified it. He was a religious scholar, figured it out according to his own read, told everybody how to behave. There's the book. You follow this, you're a good Christian. Al-Ghazali said, you follow this, you're a good Muslim. In that text included the assertion, which gained influence socially, but then politically, so then it had power of influence. In there was the assertion that mathematics and the manipulation of numbers was the work of the devil. The entire enterprise collapsed and never recovered. It has not recovered since. If you look at the number of Muslims who have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences, it's 1. Number of Jews who have won the Nobel Prize, 1/4 of all Nobel Prizes in science have been won by Jews. How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion. How many Jews in the world? 15 million tops. So you look at what effect the culture of discovery and learning can have on what you discover about the natural world. It's extraordinary.
My attitude to science is that we are fundamentally trying to understand how things work. Science is very difficult. It's very difficult to understand how things work. The hard problem of consciousness has been mentioned, the problem of the origin of the universe, the problem of the origin of life, the problem of how life has this uncanny appearance of being designed, the size of the universe, the scale of the universe, how embryology works. These are all deeply difficult questions. They require hard scientific work, and in all cases, I think I'm right in saying that scientific work consists of explaining complicated things in terms of the interactions of their parts or of simpler things. So we always try to explain complex things in terms of simpler things. We do not resort to magical language. We do not snow our audience with highfalutin sounding words that don't actually mean anything. We use words that actually have meaning. We use expressions that can be tested. We work hard at understanding the universe in terms of its component parts. We don't invent superarching entities which have no explanation in themselves. We don't invoke ideas like the universe has consciousness, the universe has awareness, atoms have awareness. If we have a difficult problem like awareness, we explain it in terms of the interactions between small parts working together in ways that scientists understand. If Freeman Dyson ever said atoms are aware, then he's wrong. I don't think he said it. I think he should sue you.
Wow. I think you've put enough on the table. Okay, none of those are scientific evidence. Many of those claims trespass upon the territory of science overtly. I mean, the claim about your understanding other human beings being suggestive of a divine artificer. Is that a scientific claim? Absolutely. I mean, is your understanding of mathematics also suggestive of a divine artificer? No, it has to do with my experience. Your ability to learn language, you understand? It has to do with my experience of you. When I'm looking at you right now, you may assume that what I see is material, but that's not what I see. And it's not what I believe. And I think I understand it's not what you believe. There's something in you that is more than you believe. I really think so. This is now, if you want to make that a scientific claim, you can. But I'm telling you, it's a metaphysical claim, and to confuse the two is a mistake. Okay, you can add any metaphysics you want. Thank you. In that, by that means, I mean, I can say, I see you as a reincarnate personality, and I think you were probably I was someone famous on Atlantis. Yes. Don't make me like a washerwoman in a people do this all the time. I mean, you can broadcast. I mean, this is constrained by our common sense in every other domain of discourse. I mean, just take, for example, the people who think Elvis is still alive. Okay, what's wrong with this claim? I mean, why is this claim not vitiating our academic departments and corporations? I mean, I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. We have not passed laws against believing Elvis is still alive. the problem is that whenever somebody seriously represents his belief that Elvis is still alive in a conversation, on a first date, at a lecture, at a job interview, he immediately pays a price. He pays a price in ill-concealed laughter.
Right. Now, surely you can agree with that.
That is a good thing. Then he could rattle on about this is not a scientific claim. This is a matter of faith. You know, when I look at you, I see you might be Elvis. I mean, he could do this.
But the thing that I find most depressing is the following. Regardless of what you may personally believe, which of these do you believe should be taught in public schools? 12% only said evolution only. Twice as many said creationism only. And then only 4%, by the way, said intelligent design only. And 55% said, why not teach all three? So if that's the case, why not teach all three? Well, the point is, we should first of all remember a piece of data I gave you earlier. In that NSF survey, and this alludes to the question that was brought earlier, 50% of adults knew that the Earth orbits the Sun and takes a year to do it. 50% of the American public, therefore, does not know that the Sun is essentially the center of the solar system. So as was pointed out in that question earlier, but even more strongly, not just a few marginal people, but 50% of the American public doesn't know this. So if that's the case, should we not teach Earth-centric cosmology and physics classes? After all, 50% of the public thinks that the Earth is the center of the solar system. Obviously not, and the reason is really quite simple. The purpose of education is not to validate ignorance, but to overcome it. And if 54% of the people don't know that humans came from earlier species of animals, it doesn't mean we should validate that. It means we have to do a better job of teaching biology in the classroom. Just the same as the fact that we have to do a better job of teaching astronomy and physics. What these data represent is not democracy in action, but rather the fact that we are doing a rotten job of teaching science. And the fact that people are scientifically illiterate is no motivation for us to just simply give in. We just have to do a better job.
And with regard to cell phone use, there's a very important fact of science, and that is the act of measurement. It's a fascinating thing, measurement, because you can never measure anything precisely. That is, with unlimited precision. You can only measure it with the uncertainties of your measuring device. And all you can do in the lab is try to constrain how uncertain that measurement is, but at some level it will always be uncertain. And here's what happens. If you're trying to measure a phenomenon that does not exist, the variations in your measurement will occasionally give you a positive signal, as well as a negative signal. If that positive signal is the idea that maybe A causes B, in this case cell phones cause cancer, a paper gets written about that result, and then people get concerned that cell phones might cause cancer or power lines might cause cancer. This goes way back. And so, in fact, if you look at the full spate of these studies, even those that they thought not to publish because it was not a positive effect, there's some cases where, in fact, there's less cancer. And so these are the phenomenon of a no result. When you actually have A causing B, the signal is huge. It is huge and it's repeatable in time and in place. With cell phones, that repeatable signal is yet to emerge from the total experiments that are done on it. That being said, if you're worried, almost every cell phone they have the cell phones on your hip and you've got an earpiece. So just do that if you're worried. But otherwise, I can either say the jury is still out or the experimental results are consistent with no effect at all.
I think that using the word God or the attitude of faith toward that which you don't know is a cop-out. It's a way of slapping a label onto something rather than trying to understand it. Or, since we may not understand everything, just say there's some things we don't understand. To invent stories that sound as if they were true or could be true, to pretend that they're true just so that we can have a story, I think is unsatisfying, and it could even be immoral because it could lead you to mistaken policies, to getting in the way of your best understanding of how the world works, to doing things that lead to more harm than good. I mean, the concrete example would be treating cancer with some cockamamie herbal or homeopathic formula instead of the best medicine that we have, or